She had the perfect plan, not almost perfect, genuinely airtight. Budget mapped down to the category, goals written out, the first week already tracked and on schedule. Then it was Monday. Not a dramatic Monday, not an emergency or a crisis, just the specific weight of an ordinary Monday in an ordinary week, the kind where the plan, which felt so clear on Sunday night, starts to compress under the pressure of actual days. By Wednesday, the tracking had slipped. By the following Sunday, she was rebuilding the plan again. And then slowly, the same thing happened again. Here is what nobody tells you about that pattern. It is not a character flaw. It is not weakness. It is the predictable, mechanical result of trying to use the wrong tool for the job. Willpower was never built to carry the weight of a financial life. Not yours, not anyone's. The people who appear effortlessly disciplined with money are not fighting harder than you. They stopped fighting entirely. Something else took over, something that does not deplete. You have been taught that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is a discipline gap. That is the wrong map. The real gap is quieter than that. It lives underneath behavior, underneath habits, underneath every plan you have ever made and watched dissolve back into your old routines. Most people spend years trying to change what they do without ever touching what they are. That is why the effort never compounds. That is why the same month keeps repeating with a different number on the calendar. What you are about to hear is not another system for staying motivated. It is something older than that and more precise. By the time you reach the end, the word discipline will mean something different to you than it does right now. Not because the definition changed. Because you will. Chapter 1. Why discipline always breaks you eventually. Every civilization that has ever risen left behind the same quiet mystery. Among the ordinary people who built those civilizations, the merchants, the builders, the ones who accumulated and created while others struggled, there was a pattern. No single culture invented it. No single era owned it. It was not about who woke up earliest. It was not about who suffered most or sacrificed longest. It was something quieter and far more dangerous to the common wisdom of every age. The people who built lasting wealth did not seem to be fighting themselves. That is the part that gets erased from the popular story. The fight, the grind, the white-knuckled morning routine, those belong to a different group. You belong to that group right now. And what you are about to hear is not another call to try harder. It is an explanation of why trying harder has been the wrong move all along. Once you hear it, the exhaustion will make sense in a new way, and it will never feel the same again. There is a question hiding inside this chapter. I want to plant it here before we go any further. The question is this: if discipline is what builds wealth, why do so many disciplined people stay exactly where they are? Hold that question. We will come back to it. And when we do, the answer will land differently than you expect. Meet Marcus. Marcus was 31 years old, and by every visible measure he was doing the right things. He woke at 5 in the morning every weekday. He journaled for 10 minutes. He read financial books for 20. He had an ice-cold shower, 90 seconds, timed, and then he sat at his desk and worked on his third business attempt before his regular job started at 8. He had tried a logistics consulting firm and shut it down after 14 months. He had started an e-commerce brand, grown it to a small but genuine revenue, and then watched himself slowly sabotage the momentum over the course of 6 weeks until the whole thing quietly died. Now he was building a marketing agency. He had 3 clients. He charged less than he was worth because asking for the real number made his throat tighten in a way he could not explain and did not like to examine. The morning he finally quit was a Tuesday in October. His alarm fired at 5 and he lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. The journal was on the nightstand. He could see its outline in the faint streetlight coming through the curtain. He had written in it 347 consecutive mornings. He knew the number because he had written the tally at the bottom of each entry, the way a prisoner marks days on a wall. That morning he did not reach for it. He lay there for 45 minutes. Then he got up, made coffee, and stared out the kitchen window at nothing in particular. By 9 o'clock he had told himself a familiar story. Today was a recovery day. He would reset tomorrow. The streak was not the point anyway. By the following Monday the routine was completely gone. The agency limped forward for 4 more months before he put it down too. Here is what Marcus believed about himself, that he was someone who could not maintain discipline. That was the story. That was the diagnosis he had written in his own handwriting in 347 journal entries, using different words each time, arriving at the same conclusion. He was not consistent enough, not committed enough. If he could just hold the line a little longer, a little harder, the breakthrough would come. But that story was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely, structurally wrong in a way that made every new attempt more costly than the last. Go back to the shape of your life at that point 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Think about what you were telling yourself then, about effort, about what you needed to fix in yourself, about what you would do differently once you got your discipline under control. Has the story changed? Or have you been circling the same diagnosis, trying newer versions of the same prescription? Because that is exactly what Marcus was doing, and it is what most people who feel behind financially are doing. The problem is not a lack of willpower. The problem is a belief in willpower as the engine. Here is the mechanism. Willpower is a finite resource. Not metaphorically finite, actually finite, in the same way a phone battery is finite. Every decision you force yourself to make against a competing internal impulse costs from the same account. Every morning you drag yourself to the desk when part of you wants to stay in bed. Every meal you choose correctly when your body wants something else. Every conversation where you hold your tongue, all of it draws from one pool. And that pool empties. This is not a character flaw. This is basic human biology, confirmed in decades of research on decision fatigue, cognitive load, and self-regulation. You are not weak for running out. You are human. But here is where the wealthy person's experience diverges from yours, and it is not where most people think. The common assumption is that wealthy people have bigger willpower reserves, that they train their discipline the way an athlete trains endurance, and after years of grinding, they simply have more of it. Some of them will even tell you that, because it is the story that makes their success feel earned in a legible way. But watch what they actually do. Watch how they spend their days. Watch what they have to force themselves to do versus what they simply do. You will find something surprising. Most of the behaviors that built their wealth do not feel like discipline to them at all. A woman named Priya built a 7-figure financial education business over 6 years. She was not naturally organized. She was not a morning person. In her 20s, she had the same struggle with consistency that Marcus had the same 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 cycle with habits, the same journal entries that circled a personal failing she could not quite name. The moment things changed for her was not when she found a better productivity system. It was when she stopped trying to be a person who was good at running a business. She started genuinely seeing herself as someone who understood money in a way that most people did not, and who felt responsible for sharing that understanding. The work that had felt forced became the obvious next action. Not easy, but obvious. She still had hard days, but she was no longer fighting herself to show up. The business was not a costume she was trying to keep on. It was just what she did. There is a phrase that matters here: identity gravity. Everything you do naturally, without significant internal friction, is downstream of your identity, the story you believe about who you are. You do not have to force yourself to brush your teeth because somewhere along the way that became part of what a person like you simply does. You do not have to muster willpower to speak your native language. Those behaviors have no friction because they are inside the identity. They belong there. Wealth-building behaviors for most people are outside the identity. They are worn like a costume you put on with intention and effort every morning and take off the moment the effort runs out. The friction you feel, the resistance, the avoidance, the collapse streak is not weakness. It is data. It is the signal that you are wearing a costume and your actual identity is pulling it off. Marcus was not failing at discipline. He was succeeding at being exactly who he believed he was. Every time he collapsed the routine, his identity won, which is precisely how identity is supposed to work. It protects itself. It resists contradiction. And every dollar you earn through pure force, through sheer willpower applied against your own resistance, actually reinforces the problem. Because the message your nervous system receives is not that you are becoming wealthy. It is that wealth requires a fight. And if wealth requires a fight and you are the same person, then you will always be at war with yourself. That is why discipline breaks you eventually. Not because you are not strong enough. Because fighting your own identity is a war that the identity always wins. The mechanism the wealthy use is not better discipline. It is a different identity, one where the expensive behaviors, saving, building, thinking long-term, asking for what they are worth, are not heroic acts of self-control. They are just what someone like them does. Before long, we will reach an idea about motivation that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it changes what you actually do on the mornings when nothing feels right. For now, understand this. The question you have been asking yourself, why can't I stay consistent, is the wrong question. Consistency is not the goal. Consistency is the result. It is the natural output of an identity that is not at war with the actions it needs to take. The right question is the one we planted at the start of this chapter. If discipline is what builds wealth, why do so many disciplined people stay exactly where they are? Because they are disciplined people, not wealthy people. The discipline they are building is perfect proof that the identity underneath has not changed, and no number of 5 a.m. alarms will fix an identity problem. They will only exhaust you faster. Marcus's 3 businesses did not fail because he lacked willpower. They failed because he was still, at the deepest level, someone who was trying to prove he could do this, rather than someone for whom this was simply natural. The costume kept slipping because a costume always does. The question the next chapter answers is the only question worth asking now. Who, exactly, are you when no one is watching and nothing is forcing you? Chapter 2. The Lie Productivity Culture Sold You. Discipline is not the answer. Almost every person who feels stuck financially believes the opposite. They believe the problem is that they are not disciplined enough, not consistent enough, not waking up early enough or working hard enough or grinding with enough ferocity. They believe the solution is more structure, better systems, a tighter morning routine with a cold shower bolted onto the front and a journaling practice bolted onto the back. That belief is wrong. Not partially wrong. Not directionally wrong. Completely, structurally, foundationally wrong. And the proof is hiding in plain sight, right inside the experience you have already lived. You have been disciplined before. You have started the plan, followed the system, tracked the habits. And somewhere between week 2 and week 6, something collapsed. Not because you are weak, because you were wearing a costume. And costumes are exhausting to hold in place. That question from the last chapter is still in the air right now. Who are you when no one is watching and nothing is forcing you? Hold that. Because everything in this chapter is built around it. Here is what productivity culture sold you. It told you that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is a behavior gap. Do the right things consistently, and the results will follow. Wake up at 5, read 30 pages, move your body, write your goals, take the cold shower, eat the clean food, invest the percentage. Over time, the compounding will do its work. That sounds almost right. It sounds right enough that millions of people have bought the books, downloaded the apps, printed the habit trackers, and started the routines with real fire in their eyes. But here is what happens next. The fire dims, not all at once. Slowly, you miss one morning and feel guilty. You miss 2 and feel worse. You negotiate with yourself one more week, a fresh start on Monday, I just need better accountability. You try a stricter version of the same system. Then a looser version. Then a friend who will check in on you. And then, quietly, the whole thing stops. Not because you are broken, because you were solving the wrong problem. Remember the shape of your life at that point 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not in your finances specifically, 3 years ago in your attempts to build better habits. What were you working on then? What system did you have? And where is that system now? If you are honest, you will find that most of what you built has dissolved. Not all of it, but most. And the parts that survived are almost certainly the parts that stopped feeling like effort. The parts that just became how you operate. Notice that, because that distinction is not small. The ones that survived stopped requiring force. That is the signal you were never taught to read. Productivity culture cannot make money off that signal, so it never taught you to look for it. Instead, it sold you a better alarm clock, a better planner, a better supplement stack, a better morning routine designed by a man who has been doing that routine for 17 years and forgot what it felt like to have to force it. What you got was a map drawn by someone who had already arrived. Maps drawn by people who arrived do not show you what it cost them on the road. They show you the destination and tell you to start walking. There is a word for what this creates. The word is friction. When a behavior requires daily force to execute, when you have to talk yourself into it every single morning, when the mental negotiation before the action takes as long as the action itself, that is friction. And here is what nobody told you about friction. It is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are lazy or weak or fundamentally unsuited to success. Friction is diagnostic. It is your internal system telling you that something does not fit, not that the goal is wrong, not that you should give up, but that the identity you are using to pursue that goal has not yet accepted the goal as its own. This is the costume versus the skin. When you wear a costume, you feel it. You are aware of it throughout the day. You adjust it in the mirror. You worry about how it looks from the outside. You feel relieved when you can finally take it off. The costume is heavy, not because it is made of heavy material. It is heavy because it is not you. Every wealthy behavior that feels like a costume right now, the investing, the tracking, the saying no to the purchase that would have felt good, every one of those behaviors takes more energy than it should, because you are holding it on from the outside. Skin is different. Skin requires nothing. You do not think about it. You do not remind yourself to wear it. You do not feel proud of yourself for having it. It is simply the surface from which you move through the world. This is how wealthy behavior works for the people who seem to operate without effort, not because they are more disciplined, because the behavior has become skin. The choice is no longer a choice. It is just what they do because of who they are. Consider Marcus. Marcus was 29 and had tried more financial systems than he could count. He had the debt payoff spreadsheet. He had the zero-based budget. He had the side project that was supposed to generate extra income. He woke up early for it every Saturday for 11 weeks. He tracked every dollar for 63 days. He was not lazy. He worked constantly. But by the time he reached month 4 of any system, the same thing happened. The tracking slipped. The Saturday mornings got shorter. The spreadsheet sat open on his laptop but not updated. He told himself he needed a stricter system, so he downloaded a new app and began again. Then one winter, something small shifted. Marcus stopped asking how to do the behaviors and started asking why they felt wrong. He noticed that every time he looked at his budget, something in his body went tight. Not anxious exactly, more like braced, like he was walking into a room he did not belong in. He sat with that feeling instead of pushing past it. Slowly, it became clear that he did not see himself as a person who managed money. He saw himself as a person who was trying to manage money. That one word, trying, was load-bearing. It was the hinge everything else swung on. When Marcus changed what he believed about himself, the behaviors changed without being forced. Not all at once. Not magically, but the friction dropped. The spreadsheet was no longer something he owed himself. It was just how he operated. The system had not changed. Marcus had. Now here is where this gets important for you. The productivity industry is not evil. The books are not wrong. The habits they recommend are in most cases genuinely useful. The problem is the theory beneath the recommendation. The theory is that if you do the behaviors long enough, the results will follow. And that is true as far as it goes, but it stops too early. It tells you what to do without asking who is doing it. When who you believe you are is in conflict with the behavior you are trying to perform, no system in the world will hold that conflict together indefinitely. Something will give. It always does. The identity always wins. Down the line in this book, we will reach an idea about consistency that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you decide what to do first each morning. Friction is not the enemy of your progress. Friction is the most honest advisor you have. Every time a behavior costs you more effort than it should, that is information. It is telling you that your internal picture of who you are has not yet included that behavior as natural. The question is never just how do I do this more consistently? The question underneath that question is why does this feel like it belongs to someone else? You have spent real time and real energy trying to discipline yourself into a different financial life. That effort was not wasted. It proved something. It proved that the behaviors alone are not enough, that the system, no matter how clean and well-designed, runs on something deeper than the system itself. It runs on identity. It runs on the quiet story you carry about what kind of person you are and what kind of life naturally belongs to you. Costumes can carry you for a while. Some people wear them for years, but the weight accumulates. And at some point, the most honest thing you can do is stop asking how to make the costume more comfortable and start asking why you have not yet decided it is your skin. What if the problem is not your habits, but who you believe you are? Chapter 3. Identity gravity pulls behavior automatically. Discipline gets harder the more you need it. That sounds like a cruel joke. You are probably already forming an argument against it. But stay with this for a moment. Every person you know who seems effortlessly consistent with their money, who saves without agonizing, who spends without guilt, who builds without grinding their teeth, is not more disciplined than you. They are simply not fighting themselves. And the reason you are fighting yourself has nothing to do with your habits, your morning routine, or how many hours you sleep. It has everything to do with who you believe you are when no one is watching. That belief is what this chapter is about. By the time it is over, you will understand why changing your behavior without changing that belief is like trying to hold a door shut against a river. The water always wins, not because you are weak, because the pressure is structural. Let us open the question that will run beneath everything in this chapter. Why do some people seem to attract the right financial behaviors without effort, while others, people with the same information, the same access, sometimes even the same income, struggle every single day to do what they already know they should do? Hold that question. We will come back to it with precision. First, you need a framework, not a metaphor dressed up as advice. An actual working model for what is happening beneath the surface of your daily choices. Think about gravity. Not as a poetic concept, but as a physical fact. An object placed near a large enough mass will be pulled toward it without being pushed. It does not need motivation. It does not need reminders. The pull is constant, invisible, and incredibly powerful. You do not coax a moon into orbit. It simply orbits because of what the planet is. Your identity works the same way. Every belief you hold about the kind of person you are creates a field of pull on your behavior. Actions that match your identity feel natural, almost frictionless. You do them without thinking, without deciding, sometimes without even noticing. Actions that contradict your identity feel like effort. They feel like holding your breath underwater. You can do it, but you cannot do it indefinitely, and you know that the whole time you are doing it. This is what identity gravity means. It is not a phrase designed to sound smart. It is the most accurate description of the invisible architecture that organizes your daily behavior, whether you are aware of it or not. When your identity says you are someone who handles money carefully, careful money behavior has no friction. It is simply what you do. When your identity says you are someone who never has enough, saving feels like deprivation and spending feels like relief. Not because you are irrational, because both responses are perfectly aligned with the self the gravity is pulling toward. The willpower methodology tells you the gap between where you are and where you want to be is a discipline problem. It tells you that if you just try harder, say no more firmly, wake up earlier and follow the right system, you will eventually arrive. What it does not tell you is that sustained discipline is a symptom of identity misalignment. When you need an enormous amount of willpower to do something, that is friction. And friction is data. It is your internal architecture telling you that what you are trying to do does not match who you believe you are. This is the recognition that changes everything. Bring yourself back to the financial instincts you were carrying back then, before memory tidies it up. Not in terms of the number in your account. In terms of how you talk to yourself about it. The words you used when you looked at your bank balance. The feeling in your chest when a bill came in. Were you someone managing money, or were you someone being managed by it? Were you deciding, or were you surviving? That internal posture, that core narrative about who you are in relation to money, is still operating right now. It may have updated slightly, but if the fundamental identity has not shifted, neither has the gravity. And that is why the behavior keeps snapping back. Here is where people get confused. They see the behavior as the problem, so they try to fix the behavior. They set up automatic transfers, delete shopping apps, make spreadsheets with color-coded categories. And for 3 weeks it works. Then one unexpected expense arrives. One bad week. One moment of genuine exhaustion, and the whole structure collapses, not because they failed, because they built a new behavior on top of an unchanged identity. And identity gravity eventually pulled the behavior back down to its original orbit. A costume fits, but it is not your skin. You can wear it long enough to fool other people, and sometimes long enough to fool yourself. But it is not what you reach for in the dark. Now let us talk about 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 grew up in a house where money was the source of every fight she ever witnessed. Her parents were good people under genuine pressure, but money in that house meant scarcity. It meant choosing between things. It meant her mother's face tight at the dinner table on the 3rd week of the month. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 graduated, got a decent job, and did what everyone told her to do. She budgeted. She tracked every dollar in a notebook, then in an app, then in a spreadsheet that took her 40 minutes every Sunday night to update. She was disciplined. She was consistent. And she was exhausted in a way she could not explain to anyone who asked. By 31, she had saved enough to make her first real investment. Not a large one, but real. And something shifted after that, not in her bank account immediately, but in her. She started describing herself differently in conversations, not intentionally. But when money came up, she stopped saying, "I am trying to get better with money," and started saying, "I am someone who makes money work." She did not notice the change right away, but the spreadsheet fell away, not because she stopped caring about money, because she no longer needed to monitor every dollar the way a guard monitors a prison. She trusted herself, because the self she trusted had changed. 3 years later, she ran her own firm with 12 employees and a cash reserve that would have seemed impossible to the woman with the Sunday night spreadsheet. She did not get there because she found better discipline. She got there because she stopped needing it. The day 𝗓𝗓𝗓 stopped budgeting was not recklessness. It was the day her identity gravity realigned. When you are someone who naturally handles money well, not as an aspiration but as a fact about yourself, you do not need a system to force good behavior. You need systems to scale good behavior. Those are completely different things. One fights the current, the other rides it. Now close the loop on the question from earlier. Why do some people attract the right financial behaviors without struggle, while others fight every day to do the same things? The answer is not intelligence. It is not access. It is not even information. It is the direction their identity gravity is pulling. The person who effortlessly saves has an identity that includes being a saver, not as a discipline, but as a description. The person who fights to save has an identity that says they are someone who struggles to save. Both people get exactly the financial behavior their identity is pulling toward. Both are working perfectly. The machine is not broken. The machine is building what the blueprint calls for. This is the principle that changes how you read every habit advice article you will ever encounter. Habits are not the foundation. Habits are the output. Identity is the foundation. If you try to install a habit on top of an identity that does not support it, you will have to maintain that habit manually, with effort forever, or until exhaustion wins. Friction is data. Say that to yourself slowly. Every time a good financial behavior feels like hard work, that feeling is information. It is not telling you that you are weak or that the behavior is too hard. It is telling you there is a gap between who you are doing the behavior and who the behavior belongs to. The gap is the real target, not the habit. You have probably tried to build at least one financial habit that worked beautifully for a while and then quietly disappeared. Almost everyone in your position has. It did not disappear because you are undisciplined. It disappeared because identity gravity is stronger than habit scaffolding. Every time, without exception. Here is where the physics analogy returns. To change an orbit, you do not push the object harder in one direction. You change the gravitational mass at the center. A small change in the mass creates a large and permanent change in every orbit around it. You do not need more willpower. You need a different center. You need a different answer to the question, who is the person doing this? A little later, you will come to a point about motivation, specifically, what it means to feel inspired to take action that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that lands, it shifts how you understand every period of your life when you felt stuck. For now, hold this. Identity is not a set of beliefs you announce. It is not a vision board or an affirmation said into a mirror. Identity is the story your nervous system has already decided is true about you. It runs behavior the way software runs a machine, silently, continuously, without your permission. Changing that story is the work. Not the only work, but the first work. And unlike willpower, identity does not get tired. The behavior was never the problem. It was always the mirror. Chapter 4. Rich people don't try harder, they try less. Something is leaking away from your life already, and it has nothing to do with how hard you work. Every week you spend grinding against a habit you don't want to keep but can't seem to drop. Every month you delay a financial decision because it feels too heavy to act on. Every year that passes while you wait for the version of yourself who will finally be disciplined enough. That cost is not standing still. It is growing. The wealth you are not building today is not just this month's missed contribution. It is the compounding that contribution would have earned. It is the position you would have held. It is the options that money would have bought you a decade from now. Here is what no one tells you about why that loss keeps happening. It is not because you lack willpower. It is because you are spending willpower on something that, for a certain kind of person, requires none. That gap between effort and ease is where this chapter lives. By the time you finish it, you will understand exactly why the people who seem to do less are often building more. The mirror was the problem. You heard that in the last chapter's closing minutes. Not the action, not the habit, not the discipline, the mirror. The image you carry of yourself when you walk up to a financial decision. That image is what determines whether the decision costs you something or costs you nothing at all. Here is what that means in practice. Imagine two people. Their names are Marcus and Delia. Both of them earn the same income, roughly $62,000 a year. Both have read the same articles about investing 20% of what they earn. Same information, same starting point, same financial goal. What is different is what happens next. Marcus sits down on the first of every month and opens his investment account. Before he even clicks anything, there is a conversation happening inside him. It sounds something like this: I should do this. I know I should do this. But rent went up and there was that car repair, and maybe just this month I can do 15% and make up the difference later. He moves money over eventually. Sometimes the full amount, sometimes less. But he is tired every time. Not physically tired. Tired in the way you feel after arguing with someone you can't quite beat. He describes investing as something he has to stay on top of. He uses words like discipline and commitment and trying to stay consistent. He is proud of himself when he does it, relieved when the month is over. Delia does the same thing. Same first of the month. Same account. Same 20%. She does not think about it the way Marcus does. She does not particularly feel proud when she moves the money, any more than she feels proud for brushing her teeth. It is not that she is wealthier than Marcus. Not yet. It is not that she has fewer expenses. She has a leaking kitchen faucet and a student loan and a sister who occasionally needs help. The difference is not her circumstances. The difference is what the action costs her. For Marcus, investing is an act of will. For Delia, it is an act of identity. And those two experiences of the exact same behavior are not even close to the same thing. Now here is the open question this chapter is going to sit with for a while. Why does the same task feel effortless to one person and exhausting to another when the external conditions are nearly identical? That question has an answer. And it is not the one most financial advice gives you. Look back at the season you were in at that point 3 years back before hindsight edits it. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were. Think about the habits you were fighting then. The ones that felt like constant uphill work. Now think about which of those fights you are still having. The ones that have not resolved. The ones where you make progress, then slip, then make progress again, then slip again. Not because you are weak, because something in the structure of how you see yourself is creating drag. That drag is what this chapter is about. There is a concept in behavioral economics that researchers call identity-behavior congruence. The language is clinical, but the idea is not complicated. When a behavior matches the way you see yourself, you do not experience that behavior as effortful. You experience it as normal. When a behavior conflicts with the way you see yourself, even a simple one, even a 5-minute one, you experience it as a drain. Not once in a while, every single time you do it. This is not philosophy. This is measurable. Studies comparing high net worth individuals with people at similar income levels but lower accumulated wealth have found something that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. The wealthy group does not report higher motivation to manage money. They report lower perceived effort. They are not trying harder. They are experiencing less internal friction. The behavior is the same. The effort signature is completely different. And here is what that means. If you are relying on willpower to build wealth, you are not ahead. You are using the most expensive fuel available for a machine that was designed to run on something else entirely. Willpower is real, and it works short-term. But every researcher who has studied self-regulation for more than a decade will tell you the same thing. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes under use, stress, hunger, and competing demands. The person who successfully invests every month by using discipline alone is performing a feat of constant mental exertion. They are running a marathon on pure determination, and there is only so long that works before the legs give out. The people who never seem to struggle with wealth-building habits are not running the marathon. They are not even lacing up their shoes the same way you are. They have built a different relationship with the behavior itself. This is what this book calls identity gravity. Every action has a gravitational pull from the identity beneath it. When the identity is aligned with the action, gravity does the work. When the identity is misaligned, gravity works against you. You can still do the thing, but it costs you something every time, and that cost compounds just like the missed investment does. The person who constantly spends willpower on misaligned tasks has less left for everything else. The person who has to force a behavior they do not identify with will eventually encounter a month where the force is not available, where the stress is too high or the energy too low, and the behavior will not happen, not because they failed, because the structure under the behavior was never built to last. Marcus is not a failure. He is a person wearing a financial costume. That phrase, the costume versus the skin, is worth sitting with. A costume is something you put on. You know you are wearing it. You have to remember to keep it on. When the day gets long or strange or hard, the costume slips. The skin is different. You do not put your skin on. It is not something you maintain. It is simply what you are, and it goes with you everywhere without effort or intention. The wealthy behavior patterns that look like discipline from the outside are skin for the people living them. From the inside, those people are not experiencing heroic self-control. They are experiencing normalcy. They do not see themselves as people who are doing hard things. They see themselves as people who do certain things, the way you see yourself as a person who wears shoes before leaving the house. And so the shoe wearing requires no internal debate. Here is a story about a man named 𝗓𝗠𝗧. He was 31 years old, working as a site manager for a construction company in a mid-sized city, earning decent money for the first time in his adult life after years of irregular work. He had heard all his life that saving money was about discipline. His father used to say, "You have to be tough with yourself." So when 𝗓𝗠𝗧 finally had something to save, he was tough with himself. He tracked every dollar. He set up a budget spreadsheet with color-coded rows. He made rules. No restaurants on weekdays. No new clothes unless something was ruined. He kept it up for 4 months. Then a rough patch hit. Nothing catastrophic, just a stressful project, a few late nights, one birthday dinner he could not say no to. The spreadsheet stopped getting updated. The rules went soft. By month 6, the savings rate was back near zero, and 𝗓𝗠𝗧 felt what Marcus felt, exhausted and privately ashamed. What 𝗓𝗠𝗧 did not know was that the problem was not his commitment. The problem was that he was approaching his financial life as a performance. He was showing up to his own money and acting the part of someone responsible with it, without ever becoming that person from the inside. The effort was always external, always applied, always conscious. And conscious effort at that scale, sustained over months, is simply not how human beings are built to operate long-term. What changed for 𝗓𝗠𝗧 was not a new budget system. What changed was the story he told himself about who he was in relation to money. That shift did not happen overnight, but when it happened, the spreadsheet became irrelevant. The tracking was no longer external enforcement. It was simply curiosity, not what he had to do, what he wanted to know. Ease is the signal. That is the revelation this chapter is built around. When something feels genuinely effortless, not because it is easy in the shallow sense, but because it is congruent with who you actually believe yourself to be, that ease is not laziness. It is not complacency. It is the signal that your identity and your behavior are pointing in the same direction. The friction you feel when you try to maintain a wealthy habit through willpower alone, that friction is data. It is telling you that the behavior does not yet belong to the identity holding it. It is telling you that you are wearing a costume. The wealthy are not more motivated. They are more congruent. That is the line that changes everything if you let it. Think about the financial behavior you find hardest to maintain right now, not the ones you never tried. the ones you keep trying and losing, the ones you are proud of for a while and then slip on. Now ask yourself honestly, do you see yourself as a person who does that thing naturally, the way you see yourself as a person who sleeps at night? Or do you see yourself as a person who is trying to become someone who does that thing? That gap is not a character flaw. It is a structural problem, and structural problems have structural solutions. Further on, you will come to a point about motivation that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you act every single morning before you have had time to think. But the open question from earlier still needs its answer. Why does the same task feel automatic for one person and exhausting for another when the conditions are the same? The answer is not about the task. It is not about the money. It is about which version of yourself you are doing it as. Marcus invests as a person who is trying to be responsible. Delia invests as a person who manages money because that is who she is. Same behavior, same account, same 20%, completely different internal experience, completely different staying power. Willpower is not the engine of wealth. It is the emergency generator you run when the real power is out. The question this chapter leaves you with is not whether you have enough discipline. You have enough. The question is this: what would have to be true about who you believe yourself to be for the behavior you want to be the one that requires the least effort? Chapter 5. The habit that was never really a habit. The most effective morning routine you could ever build is one you never have to think about. That sounds like the punchline to every productivity video you've watched at midnight, half convinced, half asleep. It is not a punchline. It is a description of how identity actually works, and it explains why everything you've been told about discipline and ritual and the sacred morning hour gets the mechanism exactly backward. Here is the question the last chapter left you holding. What would have to be true about who you believe yourself to be for the behavior you want to be the behavior that requires the least effort? Sit with that for a moment. This chapter is going to answer it. The answer is stranger than the common version of the story. It starts with a man named Marcus and a morning routine that looked like success from the outside. You met Marcus briefly before. You know about the routine. The 5:15 alarm, the cold water, the journal with its 3 gratitude entries, the 22-minute run, the protein, the review of goals written in present tense on an index card he kept next to the coffee maker. 43 minutes from alarm to dressed, every morning for 14 months. What you don't know yet is what Marcus told a friend of his, a woman named Priya, about 6 weeks before he quietly stopped doing all of it. He said, and these were close to his exact words, "I feel like I'm playing a character in a movie about a successful person." Priya laughed because she thought he was joking. Marcus did not laugh back. That sentence is worth pausing on. Playing a character in a movie about a successful person. There is a difference so important it determines almost everything about how your life unfolds. It is the difference between a costume and skin. A costume requires effort to put on every morning. It requires a kind of performance tension, a low-level awareness that the thing you are wearing does not fully belong to you, that if you stopped trying it would fall away. Skin requires nothing. You don't decide to inhabit your skin. You simply are in it every single day without negotiation. Marcus's routine was a costume ceremony. He just didn't know it yet. Now an unresolved question is carrying this chapter forward until the section closes it. If his routine was a costume whose routine is skin, and more importantly, how would you know the difference from the inside when you're the one wearing it? Most advice about morning routines focuses on the ingredients. Wake early. Move your body. Feed your mind before you feed your phone. Avoid sugar, avoid distraction, avoid the news. These ingredients are not wrong exactly. But focusing on ingredients misses the entire point of what is actually happening during the first 40 minutes of a wealthy person's day. The wealthy person is not following a checklist. They are doing something that looks like a checklist from the outside, but is, at its core, something else entirely. Call it the confirmation frame. That's the language that makes it precise. A confirmation frame is any repeated action that confirms, rather than constructs, who you already believe yourself to be. The distinction is not small. It is the whole mechanism. When you construct, you are reaching toward an identity that does not yet feel native to you. There is effort in that reach. You feel it as friction, as the low groan of forcing yourself, as the bargaining that happens between the alarm going off and your feet hitting the floor. When you confirm, you are simply recognizing something that is already true. The action and the identity are already in agreement. The body follows without negotiation. Think about that friction. Think about the mornings when getting started felt like dragging furniture uphill. That friction was not laziness. It was data. The body was reporting a misalignment between the action being demanded and the identity that was actually in residence. Friction is not a character flaw. Friction is a signal. This is where the willpower mythology does its most serious damage. It tells you that friction is the enemy and that discipline is the weapon you use to defeat it. So you white-knuckle through the alarm, force the shoes on, get the run done anyway, and reward yourself for winning the battle. But you won the battle against yourself. You spent real energy overcoming your own resistance. And every morning you have to do it again, because you never addressed what was causing the friction in the first place. The root of the friction is always the same. The action does not yet belong to the identity. Here is a parable. There was a man named 𝗓𝗧𝗓 who grew up watching his father fix watches. He spent evenings at the workbench, close enough to smell the oil and feel the heat of the small lamp, watching his father's hands move through the mechanism with a kind of calm that 𝗓𝗧𝗓 could not name as a child. When 𝗓𝗧𝗓 was 31, recently divorced, working a job that paid enough and nothing more, he bought a set of watchmaker's tools at a flea market for $12. He told himself it was a hobby. He brought the tools home and set them on his kitchen table and looked at them for 3 days without touching them. On the 4th day, a Saturday, he sat down, picked up the loop and began. He was not good. He broke 2 movements in the first week. But something in the specific act of sitting at that table, with that lamp, with those small, precise instruments, did not feel like practice. It felt like returning. 5 years later, his waiting list for repairs was 8 months long and his rent came entirely from the work. He never once described it as discipline. When someone asked him how he stayed consistent, he looked genuinely puzzled. The way you look puzzled when someone asks how you remember to breathe. 𝗓𝗧𝗓 was not disciplined. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 was confirmed. Take a breath. Let that sit for a moment, because the next thing that needs to be said is the hardest part. It requires you to be honest. And honesty at this level takes a specific kind of courage, the kind that is quieter than bravery but less common. Here is the mirror moment. Think about the last time you started a routine, a savings habit, a workout schedule, an early morning practice, and then stopped. Not because you ran out of time, not because circumstances changed dramatically, but because one day the friction was just slightly too high and you let it win. Then the next day it was easier to let it win again. And then the routine was gone before you even noticed it was going. Think about that moment. Think about the specific feeling the morning after you quit, when you woke up at your normal time without any particular plan. Was it guilt? Or was there, somewhere underneath the guilt, a quiet relief, a sense of something releasing? That relief is important data. It is telling you something your aspirational self did not want to hear. It is telling you the routine was a costume, and the body, the honest animal of you, was glad to put it down. This is not a reason to give up on your ambitions. It is a reason to diagnose honestly before you rebuild. If you put the same costume back on with slightly more determination, you will get the same result in a different number of months. The costume does not become skin through force. It becomes skin through identity revision, which is a very different project. The confirmation frame, as a practical filter, works like this. Before you build or rebuild any repeated behavior, you ask one question. Does this action confirm who I already believe I am, or is it constructing a version of me that still feels foreign? If it confirms, the friction will be low and the behavior will be sustainable. If it constructs, the friction will be high and the behavior will require ongoing willpower to maintain. This is not a reason to only do comfortable things. It is a reason to do the identity work before the behavioral work. Sequence matters more than effort. Wealthy people, the ones who have built and held wealth rather than displayed it briefly, do not generally describe their financial habits as discipline. They describe them as obvious. They describe saving a portion of income as something that would feel strange not to do. They describe investing regularly as less of a decision and more of a reflex. They describe thinking long-term not as a skill they developed but as a perspective that feels native. This is not an accident of personality. It is the product of an identity confirmed enough times, through enough repeated actions, that the behavior and the self are no longer in tension. The behavior became the path of least resistance because the identity made it so. Soon, you will come to a point about motivation that pushes directly against the usual belief. After that clicks, it shifts how you decide what to do each morning. For now, here is the close of the loop you've been holding. You asked whose routine is skin rather than costume, and how you'd know from the inside. You know because the question of whether to do it does not arise. Not in the sense that you never think about it, but in the sense that the thinking, when it does happen, is brief and resolved in one direction without negotiation. The way you decide to wear shoes before leaving the house. The possibility of not doing it exists in theory and nowhere else. Marcus eventually did stop the full routine, but he did not abandon all of it. He kept two things, the early alarm and the index card, not because they were the most impressive parts of the routine, because they were the only two actions that, when he examined them with honesty, felt like confirmation rather than construction. Everything else had been costume. Those two things were beginning to become skin. He rebuilt from that narrower, truer foundation, slowly, without performance. Every repeated action is either confirming who you are or performing who you are pretending to be. The ones who never seem to need discipline have simply stopped performing. Chapter 6. Friction is the compass, not the enemy. Something is draining out of your financial life right now, not in a dramatic way. There is no single moment you can point to, no catastrophic decision that explains it. It is quieter than that. Every time you sit down to look at your budget and then don't. Every time you open the investing app and close it 30 seconds later. Every time you tell yourself you will start tracking your spending on Monday. That is not just hesitation. That is compounding loss wearing everyday clothes. The month you delay is not just 1 month shorter. It is the growth that month would have seeded, and the growth that growth would have grown, and the options that accumulation would have purchased. All of it gone. not stolen. Just quietly bled away by a mechanism you have probably never been shown how to name. That mechanism is friction. By the end of this chapter, you will never read it the same way again. You left the last chapter with a truth that may still be settling. Every repeated action either confirms who you are or performs who you are pretending to be. The people who never seem to need discipline have simply stopped performing. They are not tougher than you. They are not more motivated, more structured, or more morally resolved. They stopped fighting friction entirely, not because they pushed through it and came out hardened, because they learned to read it. One open question is steering this chapter until the section closes it. Why do two people, given the same financial information, the same income, the same tools, produce wildly different results? One finds the budget easy, almost boring in its consistency. The other finds it an act of sustained willpower every single week. Same data, same opportunity, completely different experience. What is the actual distance between those two people? It is not discipline, hold that. Friction is information. This is not a soft reframe, not an encouragement poster dressed up in audiobook language. It is a literal and functional fact about how identity works. When a behavior costs you significant effort, when you have to push to do it, remind yourself to do it, white-knuckle your way through doing it, that effort is a signal. Not a signal that the behavior is hard. A signal that the behavior is foreign. Think about learning to drive. The first few weeks, changing lanes required conscious thought. You checked the mirror, signaled, adjusted your grip, rechecked. Every piece was deliberate, exhausting in its way. Then one day you merged onto a highway while carrying a full conversation and barely registered the lane change. The behavior did not get easier because you got tougher. It got easier because it moved inside. It became part of how you operate, not something you operate. Financial behavior works identically. When saving feels like deprivation, that feeling is not weakness. It is your current identity telling you that saving is something other people do. When investing feels abstract and slightly frightening, that is not ignorance. That is your self-concept signaling that investors are a category you do not yet belong to. The friction is not the obstacle. The friction is the map. Every point of resistance has an address, and that address tells you precisely where your identity has not yet caught up to the behavior you are trying to build. Meet a woman named Carla. She was 29, working a project management job that paid her well enough, and she had decided, firmly and genuinely, that this was the year she would finally invest. She opened a brokerage account on a Saturday in February. She deposited $200. She felt proud for about 11 minutes. Then the dashboard opened. Tickers, percentages, unfamiliar terms. Something in her chest tightened. She closed the app. She told herself she would research it first and come back when she felt ready. She came back 3 weeks later, felt the same tightening, closed it again. By June, the $200 was still sitting there, uninvested, earning nothing. She had begun to tell herself that investing just wasn't her thing, that she was more of a savings person, that maybe once she had more money, she would figure it out. Carla was not lazy. She was not financially irresponsible. She was reading the friction wrong. She thought the discomfort meant she needed more information. What it actually meant was that her picture of herself did not yet include the word investor. She was trying to do investor things while still holding the identity of someone who watches investors from the outside. The friction was not a wall. It was a street sign. It said, "Update this first." She did not get there by pushing harder. She got there the week she stopped trying to invest and started asking a different question entirely. She asked, "What would I have to believe about myself before this felt normal?" That question is the needle on the compass. Return to the season you were in at that point 3 years back before hindsight edits it, not in terms of income or savings balance, in terms of how you talk to yourself about money. What words came up? What feelings arrived when someone asked about your finances? Were you avoiding the topic entirely or engaging with it from a place of quiet anxiety? Sit with that for a moment. You already know something real about how identity and financial behavior interact. You have already lived it. The question is whether you have been reading it clearly. Now, here is the diagnostic. 3 questions. Run them on any financial behavior that currently costs you significant effort. Any habit you are forcing, any task you keep postponing, any area where willpower seems to evaporate. The first question is, what kind of person naturally does this? Not who you want to be, not who you think you should be. Who, in your gut, does this behavior belong to? If the honest answer is someone smarter, someone richer, someone who had a different upbringing, you have found the identity gap. The friction is living in that gap. The second question is, what story am I carrying about why this is hard? This is not about finding excuses to stop. It is about locating the belief underneath the friction. If the behavior feels hard because you believe tracking money is tedious and pointless, that belief is the friction, not the spreadsheet. If investing feels scary because you believe markets are unpredictable and people like you lose money in them, that belief is doing far more damage than any bad stock pick ever could. The story is the friction. The spreadsheet and the app are just surfaces the story is landing on. The third question is, what would I have to stop believing before this behavior felt ordinary? This one cuts deepest. It forces you to locate the exact belief that needs to dissolve, not a new belief to add, a specific old one to release. Carla had to stop believing that investors were a separate category of human that she was not born into. The moment she identified that belief, she could see it for what it was, a story, not a fact. And stories, once named, lose their grip. 3 questions, any behavior, every time. This is the diagnostic that turns friction from an enemy into a compass bearing. Here is what the willpower mythology never accounts for. Every system built on willpower has a fundamental structural flaw. It assumes the effort is the price you pay for the result. Push through the discomfort, earn the outcome. But that logic breaks down under one simple observation. The people who are consistently building wealth are not paying that price. They are not white-knuckling their savings transfers on the first of the month. They are not forcing themselves to review their investment accounts. The behavior is, for them, roughly as effortful as brushing their teeth. Not zero effort, but natural, integrated, part of how they are, not a performance of how they wish they were. You cannot out-willpower that gap. Willpower is a costume. Identity is skin. You can wear a costume with enormous effort and look convincing. But the moment the effort wavers, the costume slips. The person who has grown into a new identity does not slip because they are not wearing anything. The behavior is just them. Later on, you will come to a point about motivation that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it shifts every morning you wake up and try to make yourself do something you think you should want to do. But right now, hold this. Friction is not the enemy of your financial progress. Friction is the most honest data source you have access to. It tells you what your identity currently believes about money, about your own capability, about which category of person you belong to. Every point of resistance is a precise coordinate. Every place where discipline feels like a grind is a location marker showing you exactly where the identity update needs to happen. You do not push through those coordinates. You read them. You ask the 3 questions. You locate the belief. You name it. And in naming it, you begin the process of releasing it. Not by force, not by willpower, but by recognizing it as a story rather than a fact. The behavior was never the problem. So here is what stays with you as this chapter closes. Everywhere you feel friction, there is something your identity has not yet claimed. The friction is not a test of your character. It is a map coordinate, and maps exist for one purpose only: to show you exactly where to go next. Chapter 7. How the Wealthy Engineer Their Own Environment. The wealthiest people you will ever meet are not more disciplined than you. That sounds like the comfort a losing coach offers at halftime. It is not. It is a structural observation about how behavior actually works. Once you see the structure clearly, you will understand why everything you have been told about self-control and success has the cause and effect running exactly backwards. Here is the open question you should hold for the next few minutes. If discipline is not the engine of wealthy behavior, what is? You have seen people with iron discipline stay broke for decades. And you have seen people who seem almost indifferent to their own effort accumulate money steadily, almost boredly, as though money arriving was simply what their life was calibrated to do. The difference is not inside their heads. It is around their bodies. The environment makes the decision before the person wakes up to make it. By the end of this chapter, you will know exactly how that works, and exactly what to move, remove, or replace in your own life to make wealthy behavior feel less like effort and more like gravity pulling you in the right direction. The previous chapter pointed you toward what comes next. This is it. Picture the season you were in at that point 3 years back before hindsight edits it, not in broad strokes. Specifically, who were you having dinner with on a Tuesday? Whose voice was the last one you heard before you went to sleep, whether that was a person in your life or someone on your phone? What was in your refrigerator, your bookshelf, your inbox? What was the default temperature of the room you worked in, the default noise level, the default quality of the light? You probably did not choose most of those things consciously. They were simply there, and they were, quietly and without drama, producing a version of you. That is the part nobody warns you about. Environment is not backdrop. It is instruction. A man named Darius figured this out not by reading about it, but by doing the wrong thing for long enough that the pattern became undeniable. He was a real estate investor in his early 30s, and by most visible measures he was on track. He had a deal pipeline, a spreadsheet he updated obsessively, a morning routine that started at 5:15 and included cold water, a journal, and 40 minutes of reading. He had discipline in abundance. What he did not have was growth. His portfolio had been the same size for 2 years. The deals he analyzed he never closed. The savings he accumulated he spent at roughly the same rate he earned. He hired a coach expecting a strategy conversation. The coach spent the first session asking about his friends. Darius listed them. Most were people he had known since college. Good people. Loyal people. People who earned salaries in the $50,000 to $80,000 range and felt that a new car was a major financial event. People who, when Darius mentioned a potential property acquisition, asked how he could afford the risk. People who used the word risk as though it meant danger rather than calculation. The coach said almost nothing. He just asked Darius to count how many hours a week he spent in conversation with those people, versus how many hours he spent in conversation with people who were actively closing deals at the level he wanted to operate. The answer was stark. It was not even close. Here is what makes that observation land harder than it should. Darius was not choosing those conversations out of laziness. He was choosing them out of loyalty, out of love, out of a genuine sense that his old relationships were the real him and his investment ambitions were the aspirational him. The costume he put on during working hours. That phrase matters. The costume. Because he had never fully asked whether the costume was, in fact, the skin. Social environments do something to the brain that no amount of solo discipline can override. Human beings are mirroring creatures. Your nervous system takes its temperature reading from the people immediately around you. If everyone in the room treats a $100,000 deal as an enormous, frightening thing, your body learns to feel it as enormous and frightening. If everyone in the room treats it as Tuesday, your body eventually starts to process it as Tuesday. This is not metaphor. It is the actual mechanism by which identity is reinforced or corroded, day by day, conversation by conversation. Darius did not fire his friends. That is not what this story is about. He restructured his social calendar. He committed to one dinner per week with a group of investors 3 levels above his current position. He joined a deal-sharing group where the baseline conversation assumed that transactions were happening, not wished for. He did not stop seeing his old friends. He simply stopped making their social world the primary atmosphere of his professional identity. 6 months later, he had closed 2 deals he had previously talked himself out of, not because his discipline improved. His morning routine actually got shorter, not because his strategy changed. He was doing the same analysis he had always done. The room had changed, and the room changed him. Let that sit for a moment before the explanation, because the explanation is less interesting than the feeling of recognizing it in your own life. The conventional story about wealth is a story about internal resources, willpower, grit, the refusal to give up, and those qualities are real. But they are not the foundation of anything. They are what you burn through when your environment is working against you. They are the friction tax your body pays when the room assumes something about you that is not yet true. This is what wealthy behavior as default actually looks like from the outside. It looks like ease. It looks like the person is just wired differently, constitutionally suited to saving and investing and taking calculated risks in a way that other people are not. But walk into their homes, sit in their offices, look at their phones, listen to their dinner conversations, and the ease makes immediate sense. The room is doing the work. They built the room once. Now the room maintains them. Remove friction from the right behaviors, and you remove the need for willpower to initiate them. Add friction to the wrong behaviors, and you make bad decisions exhausting instead of effortless. This is not a complicated formula. It is embarrassingly simple, but simple does not mean easy to implement, because implementation requires you to look honestly at your current environment and admit what it is producing. Friction, when you read it correctly, is data. If you find it hard to save money every month, the question is not how to find more motivation. The question is what in your environment is making spending the path of least resistance. Is your savings account in the same bank as your checking account, separated by one tap? Move it. Is your highest spend category a social one, meaning you spend when you are with certain people? Then those people are part of your environment equation and deserve honest accounting. Is your phone full of content that treats consumption as identity and saving as sacrifice? That is an environment problem with an environment solution. As this book keeps moving, you will come to a point about routine that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that point settles, it shifts how you act every morning. For now, stay with the environment. There is a principle in architecture called choice architecture. It describes the way physical and social spaces are designed to make certain decisions easier and others harder, usually invisibly. Grocery stores use it to move you past higher margin items on the way to the staples you came for. Casino designers use it to remove every visual cue that would remind you time is passing. But the principle runs in both directions. You can design your own choice architecture. You can arrange the space around you to make the behavior of a wealthier version of you feel normal, obvious, and easy. What does that look like specifically? It looks like the investor who keeps her brokerage account on the first screen she sees when she opens her phone, and her social media 4 folders deep. Not because she lacks the willpower to resist scrolling, because she respects that willpower is a limited and expensive resource, and she refuses to waste it on something a folder structure can handle. It looks like the entrepreneur who schedules his highest value revenue conversations in the morning, not the afternoon. Not because he is a morning person, but because he knows his environment at 9 is sharper than his environment at 4, and he designed his calendar to honor that. It looks like the couple who agreed together that any non-essential purchase over $500 gets a 4-day waiting period built into their shared calendar. Not because they distrust each other, but because they understand that their future selves have better judgment than their present selves in a store. None of those behaviors required extraordinary discipline at the moment of execution. They required a single act of design, performed once during a moment of clarity. That is the leverage point. One moment of clear design, executed when you are at your best, protects you through every moment when you are not. Now here is the part that goes deeper than tactics. Environment design is not really about convenience. It is about identity externalized. When you restructure your physical and social environment to assume a wealthier version of you, your nervous system begins to read that assumption as reality. The room stops being a costume and starts being a skin. And once the room treats your wealth as settled, something in you starts treating it as settled too. Not as arrogance, as calibration. As the nervous system finding its correct resting temperature. This is identity gravity working in your favor instead of against you. Darius eventually understood that his 2 years of stalled growth were not a failure of effort. They were a failure of architecture. He had been wearing a financial identity like a costume every morning, and then sitting down to dinner with people who reminded him, gently and lovingly, that the costume was not who he really was. His environment had stronger opinions about him than he did. So it won. Your environment has opinions about you right now. The only question worth sitting with tonight is this: whose version of you does your room believe in? Chapter 8. The Invisible Script Running Your Spending. Something is leaking away from you already. Not dramatically, not all at once, but every purchase you make that doesn't match who you want to be costs you more than the price on the receipt. It costs you the compounded version of that money, what it would have grown into, what it would have bought you 5 years from now, what options it would have kept alive. And the strange part is that you already know this. You know the math. You've probably run the numbers. So why does the spending continue? Why does the discipline collapse in the same places, month after month, as if something underneath the decision is stronger than your intentions? The answer is not that you lack willpower. The answer is that there is a script running below your awareness. It is older and louder than any resolution you've made. That script is what this chapter is about. And once you hear it clearly, once you can identify the words it has been using, it loses most of its power. Here is the open loop this chapter will close. Why do people who genuinely want to build wealth consistently make choices that prevent it, even when they know better? The room that last chapter asked you about, whose version of you does it believe in, that question points outward. It points to environment, But the script runs inward. It has been writing itself since before you had language for money. Your parents talked about bills in a certain tone. Your neighborhood had a particular ceiling. The people you grew up watching either struggled openly or hid it behind something that looked like ease. All of that became data. And your brain, which is an extraordinarily efficient pattern machine, built a model from that data. Not a philosophy, not a belief system you chose. A working assumption buried so deep it feels like instinct. That working assumption is what shapes your spending, not your goals, not your spreadsheet, not your savings app notifications. Think about the last time you got a raise or a bonus, or a stretch of months where your income was genuinely better than expected. What happened to your expenses? Most people, if they're honest, will notice that their costs rose to meet the new income. Quickly, almost automatically. A nicer apartment felt justified. The restaurant choices shifted slightly upward. The clothing started to reflect the new number. And this felt earned, not reckless. Because on some level, spending up to a new income level is how we confirm that we deserve it. That is not weakness. That is the script. Call this mechanism the financial self-concept floor. It is the lowest income level you can tolerate before something inside you breaks the pattern. Fall below that floor and you will work harder, hustle more, take the extra shift. Find the side income not because you made a conscious plan, but because dropping beneath a certain standard triggers a kind of identity alarm. The floor is real. It protects you from total collapse. That's the useful version of it. But the floor has a ceiling built into it. And that ceiling is invisible. Here is the part nobody tells you. The same mechanism that pulls you back up when you fall below your floor also pulls you back down when you rise above it. You experience the rise as deserved spending, as reward, as finally being able to relax a little. But what's actually happening is that your self-concept has a range, a bandwidth, and when your finances push above that bandwidth, the script generates spending to bring the balance back inside the range where you feel like yourself. This is not metaphor. This is observable behavior. Consider Marcus. He grew up in a household where money was always described as just enough. Not poverty, not wealth, just enough to get by. Any extra was spent quickly because saving felt like hoarding and hoarding felt selfish, and besides, something would always come up. By the time Marcus was 31, he was earning well above what his parents had ever made. He had a solid job, no debt, and no savings. He couldn't explain where the money went. He wasn't buying things he didn't use. He wasn't gambling or making reckless decisions. He was just spending steadily, reasonably, and completely every month. Marcus started a budget. He followed it for 6 weeks. Then a small emergency came, the budget broke, and within 60 days his account was back to its usual state of near zero. He blamed discipline. He told himself he needed more motivation. He found a new system. The system wasn't the problem. Marcus didn't have a spending problem. He had a script that said people like him don't hold on to money. People like him spend it because that's what you do when you've got it. You make more when you need it. That's how life works. He had never chosen that belief. He had simply absorbed it so young that it felt like personality. The script does not announce itself. It doesn't say, "You are not the kind of person who saves." It shows up as a feeling that a full savings account is somehow fragile or suspicious or not really yours. It shows up as a vague discomfort when your balance gets high, a subtle itch to do something with it. It shows up as generosity that arrives exactly when it would cost you the most, not because you're bad with money. Because your financial self-concept floor has a ceiling, and you have been living inside it for so long that the ceiling feels like the sky. Now stop for a moment. Call to mind to your financial footing at that point 3 years back with the numbers in view. Think about what your account usually looked like. Think about what range your balance typically stayed in, month after month, across different jobs and different income levels. If the range stayed roughly similar even as your income changed, that is the bandwidth. That is the script showing you its edges. You are not imagining it. The pattern is real, and it has a source. The concept of identity gravity is useful here. Every person has a financial identity, a picture of themselves in relation to money, and gravity pulls their choices toward that picture constantly. You can make a decision that escapes the gravity. You can save aggressively for 3 months. You can cut the expense that felt necessary. You can keep the budget longer than you ever have before. But if the underlying identity hasn't shifted, the gravity is still working. Every day you hold the new behavior, you are pushing against something. And willpower, no matter how genuine, is not designed for indefinite pushing. It was built for short bursts. Identity gravity is patient. Willpower is not. This is why the willpower mythology is so damaging. It tells you the problem is your follow-through. It sells you the alarm clock at 5 in the morning, the cold shower, the motivational phrase on the mirror. And those things are not useless, but they are costumes. They are the right behavior on top of the wrong identity. And the friction you feel while wearing them is data. Friction is not failure. Friction is information. It is your actual self-concept pressing against the shape you are trying to force yourself into. The friction is the gap made physical. In a later section, you will come to a point about discipline and identity that pushes directly against the usual belief. After that really registers, it shifts how you act every morning. But first, you need to hear the script clearly, because you cannot rewrite something you have never read. The script has a few common lines. See if any of these sound familiar. Rich people are lucky, not smart, so money isn't really about skill. Or, I'm not good with numbers, so managing money carefully isn't really for someone like me. Or the quieter one, I don't want to be the kind of person who cares too much about money because that means I've lost something. These lines are not random. They were installed. And they were installed by people who, in many cases, were trying to protect you from disappointment, from envy, from the discomfort of wanting something and not getting it. The script was a coping mechanism that became a worldview. The revelation is this: you spend in alignment with who you secretly believe you are, not who you publicly claim to be. Your stated values and your actual values are visible in the gap between what you say you want and what your bank statement reflects. That gap is not a character flaw. It is a diagnosis. It tells you exactly where the script is strongest. And here is why that matters in a way most financial advice misses entirely. You don't need more discipline to close that gap. You need a different identity, a revised picture of yourself in relation to money. That makes your current behavior feel wrong, not your ideal behavior feel hard. When the identity shifts, the spending shifts with it. Not through force, through gravity pulling in a new direction. The right behavior stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like alignment. The costume becomes skin. Marcus eventually stopped fighting his budget and started questioning the story underneath it. He found a single sentence his father used to say at the dinner table: "We're not the kind of people who save for later. Later always changes." Marcus had been living inside that sentence for 31 years. Once he saw it as a sentence, as a thing someone had said, not a law of nature, he could examine it. He could decide whether it was actually true for him. He could write a different line. That is what this chapter is pointing toward. Not a new system, not a stronger version of you, a clearer reading of the script that has been directing the version of you who exists right now. Because you cannot spend differently until you believe differently about who does the spending. So the question that carries you into the next chapter is not, how do I stop doing this? The question is, what does the person you are secretly spending as actually believe about what they deserve? Chapter 9. Why motivation always arrives too late. Motivation is not the starting point. It is the reward you receive after you have already begun. That sounds like the kind of thing someone says to push you into uncomfortable action before you are ready. It is not that. It is a precise description of a sequence that most people have running in the wrong order. And getting the sequence wrong is costing you months, sometimes years, of real financial progress. You have been waiting for the feeling before taking the step. The people who build real wealth learned, usually by accident, that the feeling only comes after. And once you understand why that is true, not just as a motivational phrase, but as a mechanical fact about how identity works, the waiting stops. Something else starts instead. That is what this chapter is about. Here is a question this chapter will leave open for now and close before the end. If motivation follows action and action follows identity, then what exactly are you waiting for when you wait to feel ready? You already know what it feels like to wait. You have had the idea, maybe more than once, that you should start doing something different with your money, investing a fixed amount each month, opening an account you have been putting off, having a conversation about your finances that you have been avoiding. And you have felt the absence of whatever it is you think you need to begin. Call it confidence, call it certainty, call it the sense that the time is right. You have been checking for it the way you check your phone, expecting it to arrive, wondering why it has not. That absence is not a flaw. It is the natural consequence of misunderstanding what motivation actually is. Picture to the financial instincts you were carrying back then, before memory tidies it up. Not your income, not your savings number, but the internal posture you carried around financial decisions. Were you making them from a clear sense of who you were financially? Or were you making them or not making them based on how you happened to feel that week? Most people, when they look back honestly, see a pattern of decisions that track their emotional weather rather than a consistent identity. Good weeks produced good intentions. Hard weeks produced nothing. That is not discipline. That is weather. Motivation works the same way. It is weather. It arrives and departs on its own schedule, unrelated to your goals, unmoved by your plans, indifferent to your deadlines. Waiting for motivation to take a serious financial step is exactly as reliable as waiting for a clear sky before you decide to exist. So why do people keep waiting? Because the alternative feels like going through the motions. It feels hollow. You open the investment account without feeling excited about it, and the inner voice says this does not count. You are just performing. You will quit as soon as it gets hard. That voice is telling you something real, but it is misreading the situation. It is calling the absence of current emotion an absence of future commitment. Those are not the same thing. Here is where the principle cuts through. The hollow feeling you notice when you act without motivation is not evidence that the action is wrong. It is friction, and friction is data. What that friction is telling you is that the action does not yet match your current identity. You are wearing a costume. You can feel the seams, but the mistake is believing that the costume is the problem. The real insight is that costumes become skin, and they do it faster than you expect, but only if you keep them on. Let the story of two people show you why. Marcus and Lena were in the same financial position at 26. Both had jobs that paid enough to allow a small monthly investment. Both had read the same article about compound interest at roughly the same time. Marcus read it and felt a spark. He thought, I need to start doing this. And he waited to feel ready. He wanted to feel like the kind of person who invests. He wanted the confidence to come first so that when he opened the account, it would feel like a natural expression of who he was rather than a forced performance. 6 months passed. The spark came and went a dozen times. He never opened the account. The spark was never quite bright enough, quite long enough, quite convincing enough to override the inertia. Lena read the same article and felt almost nothing. No spark. No inspiration. She remembers thinking, this is probably what I should be doing, in the same tone she might use to think about buying more vegetables. She opened the account that evening, set a fixed monthly transfer and forgot about it for 4 months. When she checked it again, there was a small but real number sitting there. Not life-changing, but real. Looking at that number, something shifted. She did not feel like she was pretending anymore. She felt like someone who invests because she was someone who invests. The identity followed the action. The confidence followed the identity. And then something that felt a great deal like motivation arrived. Notice what just happened there. Lena did not feel like herself doing it until after she had done it. The feeling she was waiting for came as a result, not a requirement. Marcus is not the villain of this story. He is the majority. Most people are Marcus in more areas than one. Waiting, recalibrating, rechecking. Asking themselves whether they feel ready now. What Marcus did not understand is that the readiness he was looking for is not a mood. It is an identity. An identity does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as a record of repeated actions that eventually accumulates into a self-concept you can stand on. This is what identity gravity means. Every time you act in alignment with a particular version of yourself, you add weight to that version. That weight makes it easier to act that way again. The behavior becomes the default. The default becomes the identity. Gravity pulls you back to the identity you have built, not the one you wish you had, which means the problem is not that you lack motivation. The problem is that your current identity has gravity in a direction that wealthy behavior has not yet earned enough weight to compete with. The willpower methodology tells you to overpower that gravity by sheer force of intention. Decide hard enough, commit loud enough. Build a morning routine strict enough, and for a while you can hold yourself in place against the pull. But identity gravity does not get tired. You do. The moment you relax, the pull wins. This is why the effort to build wealthy habits through willpower always feels like pressing on a bruise. It hurts because you are fighting something real. The solution is not to press harder. The solution is to change what the gravity is pulling toward. That shift, the actual mechanics of it, is what the next act of this book builds toward. You are going to encounter a specific method of assuming an identity before it feels earned. It is not visualization. It is not affirmation. It is not anything that requires you to feel something first. It requires a particular quality of decision that most people never make because they are waiting for motivation to make it for them. But here is something to sit with before then. Every wealthy behavior you are not currently doing is not something you lack the information or resources to do. You know what the behavior is. You have known for a while. The gap is not knowledge. The gap is that the behavior does not feel like yours yet. It still feels like something other people do. The investor, the saver, the person who reads a financial statement without glazing over. That person feels separate from you, maybe slightly out of reach, maybe slightly foreign. And because it feels foreign, you wait for a feeling that would make it feel less foreign before you do it. But that feeling is downstream of the behavior, not upstream. You are waiting for something that only starts moving after you have already moved. The open loop from the beginning of this chapter deserves its answer now. What are you waiting for, exactly, when you wait to feel ready? You are waiting for your identity to catch up to your aspiration. You are waiting for the costume to feel like skin. And the only mechanism that makes that happen is the one thing you keep deferring until motivation arrives: the action itself. The repeated, unglamorous, emotionally unremarkable action that does not feel like you until, one day, it does. Before long, you will come to a point about confidence that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts how you decide to present yourself inside every financial situation you face. Motivation is not a force that moves you. It is a mirror that shows you who you have already decided to be. The question the next chapter answers is this: what does the decision to assume an identity actually look like in a specific moment when the feeling still has not arrived? Chapter 10. The upgrade nobody talks about making. Something is being siphoned away from you without asking your permission, not loudly, not in a way you would notice if someone asked how your week was going, but the cost accumulates the way interest accumulates, silently, without interruption, whether you are paying attention or not. Every day you spend performing discipline instead of inhabiting it, you burn a resource that cannot be stockpiled: willpower, attention, the best hours of your cognitive day. And what makes this loss different is that it compounds in reverse. The energy spent forcing yourself through habits that do not yet belong to you never reaches the decisions where it could actually move the needle. You are not failing. You are working with incomplete information about how real change is built. That distinction matters. Because once you understand the mechanism underneath the effort itself becomes a signal rather than a sentence. The question is not how to endure more. The question is what you are not yet seeing. The previous chapter left you standing at the edge of a specific problem. What does the decision to assume an identity actually look like in a specific moment when the feeling still has not arrived? That question is real. It deserves a real answer. But before the answer can land, you need something else first. You need a way to know with your own eyes whether the shift you are attempting has actually taken root. Most people trying to build wealth never get that confirmation. They track habits. They count streaks. They measure how many days they did the thing. And they mistake the count for the proof. The count is not the proof. Here is what almost nobody talks about when they talk about changing who you are financially. The change, when it is real, does not announce itself with a feeling of victory. It announces itself with a feeling of normalcy, so quiet it is almost invisible. You almost miss it because you are still looking for the dramatic version. The morning where you leap out of bed energized and grateful. The moment where saving money feels like a reward. But real identity shifts do not feel like rewards. They feel like nothing. And that nothing is the most important signal you will ever learn to read. Think back to how money moved through your life back then, before memory tidies it up. Not the numbers necessarily, but the feeling. The specific texture of the anxiety when a bill arrived unexpectedly. The low hum of avoidance when you knew you should check your bank balance but did not. The brief guilt that followed a purchase you told yourself you would not make. Hold that in your mind for a moment. Now ask yourself honestly, do any of those feelings feel different today, or do they feel exactly the same, just rearranged around different numbers? That question is not an accusation. It is a diagnostic, because if the feelings have not changed, the identity has not changed. The numbers are secondary. The identity is primary. This is where the concept of identity gravity comes back in. And it comes back harder here than anywhere else in this book. Identity gravity is the force that makes your default behavior what it is. Not discipline, not motivation. It is the accumulated weight of who you believe yourself to be. It pulls every decision, every purchase, every conversation about money toward what feels like home. If home is scarcity thinking, gravity pulls you there even when you are consciously rowing the other direction. You can row very hard for a very long time, and you will still drift back. That drift is not weakness. It is physics. So how do you know when the gravity has actually shifted? How do you know when you have crossed from wearing the costume to living in the skin? There are 3 specific signals, not feelings of confidence, not moments of peak motivation. 3 observable markers you can watch for in your own behavior, without asking anyone else, without needing a number to confirm it. The first signal is the disappearance of the mental argument. Early in any behavioral change, there is an internal debate that happens before the action. You want to check social media, and something in you argues against it. You want to buy the thing you told yourself you would not buy, and something in you builds a small courtroom case against the purchase. That argument takes energy. The specific kind of energy that leaves you tired in a way sleep does not fully fix. When an identity upgrade is real, the argument stops, not because you suppressed it, because it never starts. The person who does not think of themselves as someone who carries credit card debt does not argue with themselves in the store. They simply do not buy the thing. The same way you do not argue with yourself about not jumping off a building. It is not a category of consideration anymore. When you notice a behavior happening without the preceding debate, that is the first signal. The second signal is that friction changes direction. Earlier in this book, you heard that friction is data, and it is. But here is something specific about how that data changes when an identity shift has occurred. Before the shift, friction appears in front of the new behavior. It costs something to do the thing. After the shift, friction appears in front of the old behavior. It costs something to go back. You feel a slight wrongness, a small resistance, when you try to return to the old pattern. Not guilt exactly, though guilt can be part of it. More like the discomfort of wearing shoes on the wrong feet. Nothing is broken, but something is off in a way that is hard to ignore. If you have ever found yourself in a conversation about money and felt genuinely uninterested in complaining about what you do not have, that slight boredom with the old script is friction in reverse. That is the second signal. The third signal is the hardest one to catch because it looks like absence. It is the disappearance of the celebration. Let that sit for a moment. There is a woman named Camille. She worked in healthcare administration in a mid-sized city, earning a salary that was solid enough to live on but not enough to feel free. For the first 8 months of her financial rebuild, she tracked every dollar she did not spend. She had a small notebook she kept in her bag. At the end of every day, she did not make an impulse buy, she made a mark. She described that notebook to a friend as the thing that kept her going. Some nights she looked at those marks and felt genuinely proud. She had resisted something. She had won something. She told the same friend months later that she had stopped keeping the notebook. The friend assumed Camille had given up. She had not given up. She had just stopped needing to be told she was doing well. The decision not to spend money she had not planned to spend stopped being a victory. It stopped being anything. It was just what she did. She said it plainly. I didn't stop celebrating because I failed. I stopped because there was nothing left to celebrate. It just became Tuesday. That is the third signal. When the behavior stops being something you did and becomes something you are, the celebration evaporates. Not because you stopped caring, because the war ended. Here is what Camille's story points at. The notebook was not a system. It was a scaffold. Scaffolding serves a purpose during construction, but a building that still needs scaffolding when the construction is supposed to be finished has not finished becoming what it was meant to be. Camille did not fail because she needed the notebook early on. She succeeded because she eventually did not need it anymore. The goal was never the marks in the notebook. The goal was the day she forgot the notebook existed. Most people in their 20s and early 30s trying to get ahead financially are living inside a scaffold they have confused for a structure. They think the streak tracker is the thing. The budgeting app is the thing. The accountability partner is the thing. Those tools have value, but only as temporary scaffolding. The moment you mistake the scaffold for the building, you have stopped building and started maintaining something that should have come down by now. Now close the loop opened at the start of this chapter. The invisible mechanism causing your ongoing losses, the reason the cost keeps compounding even when you are doing all the right things outwardly, is that you are measuring behavior when you should be measuring effort. If the behavior is happening but the effort is still high, the identity has not shifted. You are still wearing the costume, and costumes are exhausting across a long day. They do not breathe right. They remind you constantly that you are playing a part. The cost of wearing that costume every morning, every purchase decision, every time you look at your account balance, is the hidden tax that eats the progress you should be keeping. Down the line in this book, you will come to a point about routine and discipline that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it shifts how you start every single morning. But right now, the work is this. Go find an area of your financial life where the effort is still high, not a place where you are failing, a place where you are succeeding but only barely, only with strain, only with a daily renegotiation between who you want to be and who you currently are. That strain is not evidence of weakness. That strain is data. It is telling you exactly where the identity has not yet taken hold. And that is precisely where the work belongs. A true identity upgrade is confirmed not by new actions, but by the disappearance of the effort those actions once required. Chapter 11. Stop borrowing habits from the wrong person. Copying someone else's habits is one of the fastest ways to guarantee those habits will never work for you. That sounds like an argument against learning from successful people. It is not that argument. It is something more specific and considerably more uncomfortable. The habits you see on the outside of a wealthy person's life are not the source of their results. They are the exhaust. They are what a particular identity looks like when it runs hot. When you borrow those habits without borrowing the identity underneath them, you are not adopting a system. You are wearing a costume. The question this chapter will answer is not whether you should study successful people. You should. The question is why studying their schedules, their morning routines, their cold plunge rituals, and their 4 a.m. alarm so often produces a few weeks of momentum followed by a collapse that leaves you feeling worse than before you started. You have probably been there. Most people who care about building something have been there. Revisit the season you were in at that point 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Think about what habit or routine you adopted because you read about it somewhere, watched someone describe it in an interview, or saw the results it seemed to produce in another person's life. Think about how genuinely motivated you felt at the start. The alarm went off at 5. You got up. You followed the protocol. You felt for a moment like someone who had finally cracked the code. And then, somewhere between week 2 and week 6, the whole thing quietly collapsed. Not because you lacked willpower, not because the habit was wrong for everyone, but because somewhere in your body, something did not accept the premise. That friction you felt was not weakness. Friction is data. Now here is the open loop this chapter is going to hold for you. There is a specific moment inside every borrowed habit's collapse when the identity underneath makes its move. Almost nobody recognizes it when it happens. By the time you finish this chapter, you will see that moment clearly, and you will understand exactly why recognizing it changes everything. Marcus had been running a small logistics company for 3 years when he hit his first real plateau. Revenue had stalled. His team was capable but directionless. He had read everything he could find about high-performance leadership, and one name kept appearing in every article, every podcast, every comment section. He did not have access to that person, but he had access to the schedule. He printed it out. He mapped his own week around it. 4:30 a.m. wake time, 2 hours of focused work before any communication, a hard stop for physical training, a compressed decision-making window in the early afternoon, no meetings after 3. For the first 2 weeks, Marcus felt electric. He was producing more by 9 in the morning than he used to produce by noon. His clarity felt sharper. He told 2 people close to him that this was the thing, the actual change he had been missing. By week 4, the cracks had appeared. He was resentful by Thursday of things he had enjoyed on Monday. He was short with his team in ways that confused them. He was producing output but dreading the moment the alarm went off. By week 6, he had abandoned the entire structure and returned to his old schedule. And with it came a quiet conviction that discipline was simply not something he had been built for. What Marcus did not understand was that the schedule he had copied was not a cause. It was a portrait. The person whose schedule he had borrowed operated inside a specific identity, someone who had already decided at a deep and settled level that their work was the central organizing fact of their life. Not a sacrifice, not a discipline, the central fact. The early morning was not an act of willpower for that person. It was what happened when someone who genuinely could not wait to work woke up. The absence of afternoon meetings was not a rule they enforced. It was the natural result of a person whose decision-making felt precious to them, not burdensome. Marcus had copied the shape of that life without possessing the interior of it. Every morning, his body registered the alarm as an imposition. His identity, the one running quietly in the background, still believed rest was earned, still believed productivity was a performance rather than a pleasure. That identity woke up 60 seconds after Marcus did, looked at the schedule, and began the slow work of dismantling it. The costume was on. The skin had not changed. Here is what people miss about wealthy people and the habits they describe in interviews. When someone who has spent 20 years building a business describes their morning routine, they are describing what a person at peace with their identity does in the morning. They are not describing the technique that produced the peace. The cart is being narrated as the horse, and millions of people listen, write down the cart, strap it to themselves, and wonder why they cannot move. This is where the willpower mythology does its most sustained damage. It convinces you that the gap between your current behavior and the behavior of someone more successful is a gap in effort. So you try harder. You find the habit they use. You apply more force. And the effort itself becomes evidence against you because effort means resistance, and resistance means the identity underneath has not accepted the premise. You are not pushing toward your future self. You are fighting your current one. Borrowed habits are costumes. That is not a metaphor designed to make you feel better about quitting. It is a precise description of a mechanism. A costume sits on the surface of the body. It creates drag. It requires constant adjustment. It reminds you, every hour you wear it, that it is not yours. When you are tired, when you are stressed, when the week has ground you down, the first thing that comes off is the costume. Because the body knows the difference between what belongs to it and what was borrowed. Skin is different. Skin does not require effort to maintain. You do not decide every morning to keep your skin. It simply is. And the behaviors that belong to a true identity work exactly that way. They do not disappear under stress. They do not require renegotiation every Monday. They persist because they are not separate from the person wearing them. So how do you know when a habit is a costume and when it is becoming skin? The test is not whether it feels easy. New habits rarely feel easy at first, even ones that belong to your actual direction. The test is whether the friction changes over time. Costume friction stays flat or increases. You push through week 1 and week 2 feels just as hard. You push through week 4 and week 6, you are exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with physical fatigue. That is identity rejection. Your current self treating the habit like a foreign object. Skin friction is different. It decreases. Not because you are summoning more willpower, but because the identity underneath is slowly reorganizing around the new behavior. Small frictions disappear first, then larger ones, and at some point the behavior simply continues without you attending to it, the same way you do not attend to keeping your skin. This is the moment the previous chapter was pointing at. A true identity upgrade is confirmed not by new actions, but by the disappearance of the effort those actions once required. The metric is not what you do. The metric is how much of you it costs to do it. So what does this mean for the person who has been borrowing habits and burning out? It means you need to stop asking what successful people do and start asking who they believe themselves to be before they do it. That is the source. The schedule, the ritual, the routine, those are downstream. They are the natural outflow of an identity already in motion. You cannot shortcut to the outflow. You have to work upstream. When Marcus eventually came back around to high-performance habits, he came at them differently. He did not start with someone else's schedule. He started with a question. What does a person believe about themselves, about work, about time, about their own capacity, when those habits feel natural rather than imposed? He sat with that question for weeks. He tested small behaviors that pointed toward that identity rather than copying the full shape of someone else's life. His 4:30 alarm did not appear on week 1. It appeared on week 11. It appeared because he had been going to bed earlier and earlier without deciding to. Because his mind was arriving at morning work before his body did. Because the identity had begun to shift. That is not a trick. That is the mechanism. Here is the moment inside every borrowed habit's collapse that almost nobody recognizes. The moment is not when you quit. The moment happens about 72 hours before you quit, when you catch yourself performing the habit without thinking about the identity it belongs to. You are doing the thing, checking the box, running the protocol, but the why has gone hollow. You are executing a behavior that belongs to someone else. Some part of you knows it. And the knowing is the beginning of the end. When you catch that hollow feeling, most people interpret it as motivation fading. It is not. It is the identity underneath declaring itself. It is the most honest signal your inner architecture sends. And if you learn to read it rather than fight it, it becomes precise guidance about where your actual identity work needs to happen. Friction is not failure. Friction is a map. A little later, we turn toward an argument about motivation that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that lands, it reshapes how you decide which habits are worth building at all. But before you get there, carry this with you. The question is never whether you have enough discipline to keep someone else's habit. The question is whether the identity that habit belongs to has taken root in you yet. If it has not, no amount of forcing the habit will create the root. You cannot wear your way into a new self. Chapter 12. You were never undisciplined, you were miscast. Every culture that has ever existed has carried the same quiet story. Somewhere in its bones, in its proverbs and its warnings, it holds the idea that certain people are built for certain lives, that a person who keeps failing at the same task is not weak. They are simply in the wrong place. This knowing is older than any book. It has been spoken around fires, carved into walls, passed from hand to hand across centuries and continents. And yet somehow, in the age of productivity and habit stacking and 5 a.m. alarm clocks, this ancient knowing got buried. It got buried under one very loud and very dangerous idea, that if you just try harder, you will finally become the person you are supposed to be. You have been living inside that lie. The friction you have felt, the times you collapsed and called yourself lazy, the plans you abandoned and the guilt you carried, none of that was a character flaw. It was a signal. And this chapter is where you finally learn to read it. You cannot wear your way into a new self. That sentence came at the end of the last chapter, and it deserves a moment to breathe. Because what it means is this: all the routines you borrowed, all the schedules you copied, all the cold showers you forced yourself through at 5:45 in the morning, those were costumes. And costumes, no matter how well fitted, eventually come off. Here is the open question, the one this chapter will answer. If discipline was never the problem, what was? Think about Marcus. You heard his name earlier in this book. He was the man who built the perfect morning. He set his alarm for 5:15. He had his journal on the left side of the nightstand and his running shoes placed sole down at the foot of the bed. He followed the system for 11 days. On day 12, the alarm went off and he lay there, staring at the ceiling. The thought that arrived was not laziness. The thought was, "This is not me." He did not know what to do with that thought, so he called it failure. He reset the alarm. He told himself he would do better, but the thought came back. It always comes back, because the thought was not a symptom of weakness. It was the voice of a self that refused to be buried. Marcus did not fail his morning routine. His identity correctly rejected a costume that did not fit. That distinction is not a small thing. It changes everything. Here is what the willpower mythology does to you. It takes the evidence of identity misalignment, the friction, the resistance, the repeated collapse, and it repackages it as moral failure. It says you are not trying hard enough. It says you lack the grit that successful people have. It makes you audit your character instead of your casting, and so you try again with more force, more punishment, more guilt. The result is exactly the same, because the problem was never the amount of effort. The problem was the direction. Friction is data. You have heard that phrase before in this book, and here is where it sharpens into something precise. The specific kind of friction that comes from forcing a habit that contradicts who you are, that friction is not resistance to growth. It is resistance to falseness. Your nervous system, your deep sense of self, your identity gravity, call it what you want, does not care about your goals. It cares about coherence. It will always pull you back toward what feels like you, whether that version of you is serving your future or not. This is why two people can attempt the exact same habit, and one finds it effortless while the other suffers. The habit is not the variable. The identity is. Call up the season you were in at that point 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Think about the habits you tried to build and the ones that quietly died. Now ask yourself this: Which of those failed habits truly felt like you, even in your best moments? And which of them felt like a performance, not a judgment, just an honest look? Because somewhere in that answer is the exact information you need. Most people never ask that question. They ask instead why they could not stick to it. They look for the motivational failure, the discipline deficit, the morning they slept in or the evening they skipped. But the real question is earlier than all of that. The real question is whether the habit was ever an expression of who you actually are, or an impression of who you thought you should become. Here is the revelation, and it is one that might feel like relief. Every failed habit in your past was correct feedback. You were not failing at becoming wealthy. You were succeeding at rejecting a false role. Read that again slowly in your own mind. Every collapsed routine, every abandoned plan, every Monday you reset, and every Friday you quit, none of that was evidence against you. It was evidence against the costume. The part of you that kept saying "this is not me" was not your weakness speaking. It was your truest, most intact self holding a line. Now the question is not how to force yourself harder into the role you have been performing. The question is what role actually fits. This is where it becomes practical. This is not a chapter about self-acceptance as an excuse to stay still. This is a chapter about precision. The wealthy behavior you are after, the consistency, the follow-through, the habits that compound without costing you everything, those only feel effortless when they are anchored to an identity that is genuinely yours, not borrowed from someone else's biography. A woman named Celeste spent 4 years trying to become the investor her older brother was. He woke early, read financial reports with coffee, tracked positions before the market opened. She copied every piece of it. She collapsed every time. The habit felt cold to her, transactional, like a job she had not chosen. One afternoon, sitting in a local restaurant owned by a family she had watched struggle and then thrive, something shifted. She realized that what moved her was not the abstraction of numbers on a screen. It was the tangible, human story of a business built by real people solving a real problem. Within 6 months, she was researching small businesses with the same compulsive energy her brother brought to tickers. The habit did not require discipline. It required alignment. Celeste was not undisciplined. She was miscast. The difference between Celeste forcing her brother's system and Celeste following her own instinct is the difference between wearing a costume and wearing your own skin. One requires constant maintenance. The other simply is. This is what identity gravity does when it is working for you instead of against you. It pulls you toward the behavior without requiring you to push. The wealthy people who appear disciplined from the outside are not exerting more force than you. They found a role that fits. And what looks like discipline from where you stand is actually the absence of resistance. You have been measuring the wrong thing. You looked at their output and concluded you needed more willpower. What you actually needed was different casting. The failed version of you, the one who quit the journal and let the alarm go unanswered and canceled the savings transfer, that version was not your enemy. That version was loyal to something real. The task now is not to punish that version into submission. The task is to understand what it was protecting and build from there. That is the answer to the open question from the beginning of this chapter. If discipline was never the problem, what was? You were playing a character written for someone else. And no amount of willpower can make someone else's character feel like home. The chapter ahead will show you what it looks like when the role finally fits. Chapter 13. The person who finds wealth effortless already exists. You have already pictured this person, not in a vague, hopeful way, in a specific, quiet way late at night or early in the morning when your defenses are down. You have seen yourself moving through a version of your life where money is not the source of daily dread, where the decisions that feel labored right now feel obvious. You have touched that picture and then set it down. Some part of you decided it was fantasy and not blueprint. That is not a failure of imagination. That is something more precise. And it is worth naming clearly. You are not lacking the vision. You are lacking permission to take it seriously. That gap between the person you can picture and the person you believe you are allowed to be is the only thing standing between you and the behavior that looks effortless from the outside. This chapter is not going to ask you to work harder. It is going to ask you to stop performing a role that does not fit you and recognize the one that does. Here is the open question this chapter will hold for you. If effort is not the engine, what is? You have heard the word identity used loosely before. So set that word aside for a moment. Think instead about gravity. Every person has a pull, a default direction, a resting state they return to when no one is watching and no willpower is applied. Some people's gravity pulls them toward spending without tracking it. Some people's gravity pulls them toward building without being told to. The behavior looks like discipline from the outside. From the inside, it simply feels like going home. Think about that exhausting morning routine you tried a few years back. The 5-alarm wake-up, the journaling, the cold water, the productivity list by 6. Remember how long that lasted. Not because you are lazy, because it was a costume. A costume is not the same as skin. A costume requires constant effort to keep in place. Skin requires nothing. It is simply what you are. Friction is data. The friction you felt wearing that routine was telling you something useful. It was not telling you that discipline is impossible for you. It was telling you the identity that routine was built for was not yours yet. The routine was designed for a version of you that did not yet exist in your body, in your beliefs, in your sense of what a person like you naturally does. That version, though, that version does exist, and you have felt it. Think about a moment in your life, it does not have to be financial, when something that looked hard from the outside felt completely natural to you. A period when you were solving a specific kind of problem or building a specific kind of thing and the hours moved differently. You were not pushing. You were pulled. That pull is identity gravity, and it is not random. It is pointing somewhere. Here is where this chapter asks you to pause. Rewind to life 3 years ago, not generally but specifically. What were you worrying about? What did you believe was fixed about your life? Now look at what has actually shifted since then, even slightly. The person you were 3 years ago would not fully recognize the clarity you have right now in this moment. That movement was not random either. Something in you was already pulling in this direction. The question is not whether that pull exists. The question is whether you are going to honor it or keep arguing with it. Now, let us do something different. Let us locate the person who finds wealthy behavior effortless, not as an aspiration but as a present fact. This person wakes up and does not negotiate with themselves about looking at their accounts. Numbers are not charged with shame for them. Numbers are just information, the way a temperature reading is just information. They look, they note, they decide. No drama. No avoidance. That ease is not because they have more money than you. It is because they do not have a story attached to the number. They separated the data from the verdict a long time ago. This person does not spend energy resisting purchases they cannot afford, not because they have unlimited willpower, because those purchases do not pull at them with the same weight. Their identity gravity is oriented differently. The thing that feels satisfying to them is not the purchase. It is the position, the option. The quiet knowledge that they chose future freedom over present relief. That orientation is not a personality type you are born with. It is a location you move into. Consider Marcus. He was 31, working in a distribution warehouse outside of Memphis. For years he had tried and failed at every financial system his coworkers and family suggested. The envelope method, the no-spend month, the automated savings app he deleted within 6 weeks. Every system felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Then one unremarkable Saturday, he sat down and wrote out, in plain sentences, what a person he genuinely respected would do with $200 extra at the end of a month. Not a celebrity. A real, specific person he knew. His uncle, who had built a small rental property over 15 years without drama or fanfare. Marcus wrote what that man would think, what he would feel, what he would decide. And then he made the same decision, not because he had suddenly become disciplined, because for one moment he inhabited a different identity gravity and let it make the choice. He did it again the next month, and the month after, not through force, through repetition of a role until the role began to fit. That is the difference between a costume and skin. A costume is something you put on. Skin is something you grow into. Now here is the thing this whole book has been building toward. The answer to the question raised at the start of this chapter, if effort is not the engine, what is? Recognition is the engine, not effort, not habit stacking, not accountability partners or morning alarms or vision boards. Recognition. The wealthy person you are capable of becoming is not a future stranger you must construct from scratch through years of grinding self-correction. That person is a version of you that already has coherent logic, already has values, already has a way of moving through the world. They are not hypothetical. They are latent. The real work is not building them. It is recognizing them. Giving them permission to be the operating identity instead of the aspirational one. Every piece of friction you have felt along the way, every system that did not stick, every habit that fell apart, every morning you hit dismiss instead of rising with purpose, that friction was not evidence of your failure. It was evidence of a mismatch. The costume did not fit. The identity that routine was borrowed from was not yours. The role that fits you is quieter, more specific, built from your actual values and your actual pulls, not from the image of a wealthy person someone else described. And when you inhabit it, not perform it, inhabit it, the behavior stops requiring force. The open loop closes here. Effort is not the engine because effort is what you use when you are moving against your own gravity. Identity is the engine because identity is the direction your gravity already pulls. You do not need to become someone new. You need to stop insisting you are someone old. The person who finds wealth effortless is not waiting to be built. They are waiting to be recognized. Chapter 14. Rest is now your most productive financial strategy. There is a moment that arrives in every era of human civilization, quiet and easily missed, when a person stops fighting the river and begins moving with it instead. Across every culture that has ever left a record, across every language that has ever tried to describe what it means to live well, this moment appears. Not the moment of great effort, not the heroic push, the moment of recognition. When a person finally sees that the life they were straining toward was never meant to require that much strain. You have been in that river for a long time, and somewhere between the beginning of this book and right now, something began to shift in you. You may not have a word for it yet, but you felt it. That is why this chapter exists. Not to teach you something new, but to name what has already happened inside you and to hand you the language that makes it permanent. This section starts with an unanswered question until the section closes it. If ease is the destination, Why does rest still feel like a crime? You recognized yourself. That person who set 4 alarms and treated exhaustion as a badge. The one who measured daily worth in completed tasks and believed that any moment of stillness was a moment being stolen from the life they were trying to build. That was not discipline. That was a person wearing a costume so long they forgot it was not their skin. Here is the cost no one names plainly. When you operate from that kind of forced effort every single day, you do not build wealth. You build a version of yourself that is always one bad week away from collapse. Friction is data. That phrase has run through this entire book like a current. Every chapter pointed back to it. And now, standing at the end, you can feel what it actually means. The exhausting morning routine was never a problem of laziness or weakness. It was information. It was your identity sending a signal that the performance had no roots. You were doing the things wealthy people do without yet being the person for whom those things are natural. The costume creates friction. The skin does not. Think about the last time something was genuinely easy for you. Not easy because it required no work, but easy because the work fit who you actually are. Maybe it was a conversation where you knew exactly what to say without rehearsing. Maybe it was a decision that others agonized over and you simply saw clearly. In that moment, were you exhausted afterward? Or did the effort feel more like breathing than lifting? That is what this chapter is pointing toward. That feeling is not luck. It is not talent. It is identity alignment. And it is available to you at the level of your finances, your daily habits, and your relationship with time, once you stop treating rest as the enemy of progress. Now here is something that surprises almost every person who arrives at this understanding. Rest does not become productive when you schedule it better. It does not become productive when you earn it at the end of a hard week. Rest becomes productive when your identity no longer requires you to perform. When the behaviors that build wealth stop feeling like disciplines you enforce and start feeling like expressions of who you already are, rest becomes part of the system rather than a break from it. A person who is financially aligned does not rest despite their ambition. They rest because of it. Recovery is not a retreat. It is the very act of consolidating who you have become. There is a woman named Claire who ran a small design consultancy and built her entire schedule around hustle metrics, billable hours, client acquisition rates, weekly revenue targets she tracked on a whiteboard above her desk. For 3 years she grew slightly and painfully. Then one week her calendar fell apart. A project canceled. 2 meetings pushed. A rare stretch of open afternoons. She told herself she would use the time to catch up. Instead, she sat. She thought. She sketched without purpose. On the 3rd afternoon, she had an idea she had never had before, not because she was more rested, but because she had finally stopped suppressing the part of her mind that actually did her best work. Within 6 months, that one quiet idea had become her most profitable service line. Claire did not unlock some mysterious creative force. She simply stopped drowning it in noise. The silence did not produce the idea. The identity underneath the silence did. You have heard this book describe identity gravity, the pull that makes certain behaviors inevitable rather than effortful. What you may not have fully absorbed until now is that rest has its own gravity inside a healthy identity. A person who knows who they are does not need to constantly reassert it through action. They can be still and remain themselves. That stillness is not emptiness. It is confidence made physical. So here is the answer to the question opened at the beginning of this chapter. Rest still feels like a crime because the willpower mythology told you that you are only as valuable as your output. that your worth is earned in increments of productive time. That stopping means falling behind. That mythology had one job: to keep you just motivated enough to keep moving and just exhausted enough to never question the direction. You are questioning the direction now, and the direction has changed. You are not trying to add rest to your schedule as another optimized variable. You are recognizing something deeper. A person whose identity is genuinely aligned with wealth does not experience rest as downtime. They experience it as a natural rhythm. Work and rest alternate not because the calendar demands it, but because the body and mind doing real, identity-rooted work require both as equal parts of the same process. Bring to mind the season you were in at that point 3 years back, before hindsight edits it. Before you had words like identity gravity or friction as data or the costume versus the skin. Think about what a day off felt like then. Did it feel clean and deserved? Or did it feel like guilt wrapped in exhaustion? If it felt like the second thing, that was not a character flaw. That was the cost of performing a wealth identity you had not yet internalized. Now ask yourself honestly, does rest feel different to you today than it did on page 1 of this book? If the answer is yes, even slightly, then something real has already moved in you. The final callback this book has been building toward is this: that exhausting morning routine, the cold shower you hated, the journal you filled with affirmations that never quite felt true, the gym sessions you dragged yourself to while resenting every minute. That routine was not the problem with you. It was the evidence that you were trying to install wealth behavior as an override on top of an identity that was not yet there. Behavior without identity is theater, and theater is exhausting by design. You do not need to perform anymore. When discipline feels like rest, the identity shift is complete. Read that again with your ears. When what the world calls discipline feels to you like the most natural expression of who you are no longer performing wealth. You are expressing it. The difference is not cosmetic. It is the whole thing. It is everything this book has been pointing toward since the very first sentence. Wealthy behavior, real and lasting and self-sustaining, does not live in your calendar. It does not live in your habits list or your morning protocol or your accountability structure. It lives in the identity underneath all of that. An identity, once genuinely rebuilt, does not need to be maintained. It simply persists. You have crossed something here. Not a finish line, because this is not that kind of story, but a threshold. The person who picked up this book was still looking for the right system, the right routine, the right set of disciplines that would finally make the difference. The person finishing this book knows something quieter and more durable than any system. You are not behind. You never were. You were simply becoming someone the old strategies could not yet accommodate. Carry this with you. One sentence. Your new anchor: I do not force who I am, I live it.